So hello dear listeners, and for those of you who happen to be watching us on YouTube, you will find a recording of this podcast on my YouTube channel Tudor Talk. But I have come to Norfolk actually for this recording, and I'm in the fair city of Norwich, a first for me actually, I have to say. And of course, back in Tudor times, Norfolk was part of East Anglia, and I am here to explore a very special event related to Norfolk, but I'm not on my own. I have a guest with me today, Aidan. Hello, Aidan Norrie. Hi, nice to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so Aidan, you're from the University campus North Lincolnshire.
Yes.
Okay, and I know we've been chatting, and the event that we're talking about today is particular interest.
It is.
Of yours.
It is.
So maybe you just want to introduce yourself and what we're here to talk about today.
Yeah. So I'm a historian primarily of Elizabeth I. So anything to do with her reign, I'm there. Brace yourself. There is a good chance I will just refer to her as Bay in the podcast because I do that. It just slips out. It happens. But I really get interested in anything to do with her public performances and that kind of thing. So civic pageantry is right up there when it comes to that kind of thing.
Yeah, and this was a big progress, wasn't it, tonight?
It was. It was one of the biggest of her reign, certainly both in terms of length and distance travelled. It's the only time she went even anywhere close to this part of the country. I've never been able to confirm it, but depending on the route that she took around, it might actually be the furthest north she went as well.
Ah, okay. All right. Well, there's going to be lots to explore. And I will just say for folk who are tuning in and listening, we are filming in the middle of Norwich. It's a Saturday morning, Jubilee weekend actually, when we happen to be recording this. So there's lots going on, and you will hear, dear listeners, you will hear sounds of life going on around us. Hopefully that won't detract from your enjoyment of this though. Okay, so shall we just talk first a little bit about royal progresses, particularly Elizabeth's progresses? She was famous, wasn't she?
She was.
Progresses. Can you talk about them in general? Why did they happen?
Yeah, so a big part of it was to get out of London during the summer. Go on progress when someone else has to pay for your lodgings, your food, all of that. Elizabeth was famously tight with money. Whether that means she was good with money is another thing entirely, but it does mean while you're on progress, other people pay for your living expenses. But Elizabeth, being a royal family of one, was very big on showing herself. Actually, much like the current queen, the idea of I must be seen to be believed, that kind of thing was, there's a very Elizabeth I attitude. And she travelled a lot, not as far as some of her predecessors, like never went to York, like both her father and grandfather did, but in terms of miles covered and places visited, she's by far the most travelled of the Tudors. They're really good for tying royal authority to her person, particularly if something slightly naughty has happened in a place and they need to be reminded of their place. Nothing like having the Queen come through to remind them of their duty, really.
Yes, and I guess that's something she did borrow from her father
Yes.
and grandfather.
Very much so.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how did you get into Elizabeth's progresses, and particularly this one here to Norwich?
I did my MPhil on child actors in civic pageantry, and there are lots of child actors in the Norwich one. But more importantly, I was really interested in this one because it's the first of Elizabeth's progresses to have two separate published accounts. The first is only in 1574 in Bristol, also by Thomas Churchyard, who wrote one of the ones for this. So it's a relatively new kind of phenomenon almost. But the fact that there's two, and they clearly didn't get along, shall we say. The printed accounts contain various kind of snipes at each other. When things go wrong for the other person, the other one gleefully records it. But when you put them together, you get a really nice kind of almost day-by-day account of what goes on.
And that's wonderful, isn't it? Because I love it, you know, having researched a couple of progresses before in my time, the detail, when you find some of the detail, it can be quite rare, but when you do, it's really illuminating. Lets your imagination just run wild.
Yeah.
So I don't think we've mentioned the year that
No,
Elizabeth came here, so maybe we should put that in context.
We should,
first.
yeah. So 1578 in summer, not that far. I mean, looking at the weather today, this is not that far from what she would have experienced. This progress was known for being rained out a lot. Lots and lots of rain. But yeah, so 1578 during summer, Elizabeth goes on progress through East Anglia and sort of meanders her way slowly up to eventually to Norwich, gets here on the 16th of August. So proper English summer there.
Proper English summer, and you're quite right, it's it's a very blustery grey day, isn't it, here today? And I think rain is forecast tomorrow, which, yeah, I can see. I was reading a little bit of the account, and I know one of the days at least was rained off.
Yes.
So I think that's going to happen here for us tomorrow. Anyway, okay, good. So she arrives here middle of August, 1578. Is there any particular reason why she makes this progress?
Yes. I mean, Elizabeth never travels anywhere without a purpose, but Norwich in particular is a really weird mix. Lots and lots of Catholic recusants here. I mean, so the Duke of Norfolk has only been executed 6 years previous for his role in the Ridolfi plot and putting Mary Queen of Scots on the throne. And having such a high-ranking Catholic magnate in the place had meant that lots of Catholics had been preferred. They were in lots of different positions of authority around the county. So they were embedded, and then Norwich itself has been a hotbed of Puritan radicalism, really, since the Edwardian period, since the reign of Edward VI. So you get this really weird mix of Catholics versus more radical Protestants, which Elizabeth is happy with neither. And we've had a new bishop in Norwich who is not very good at handling the two. And that causes all sorts of problems. And essentially, before the progress, the Privy Council, obviously with Elizabeth's approval, rules that the bishop needs to crack down on both Catholics and Puritans with equal severity. And the progress is essentially Elizabeth literalizing the decision. I made this decision, you're going to follow it. And we'll see that as part of the pageant entertainments. You know, the city recognises that they've got in trouble for it, and they do want to make up for it and make amends.
And that's what we're going to do, aren't we? We're here, we've arrived, and we'll talk about the church that we can see behind us for those people who are watching on YouTube in a moment. But we're here really to follow in Elizabeth's footsteps as she arrives at the city of Norwich and makes her way towards where she was going to be staying during her time here. So maybe, could you tell us a little bit about Norwich, the city? You know, what did it look like at the time? What would Elizabeth have seen if she'd arrived here? It's
almost incredible to think about, but for much of the early modern period, Norwich was England's second city. It was the second largest. I mean, London has a population of about 200,000 and Norwich is about 16,000. So nothing like what we're used to today, but in terms of size, it's the second largest. It's a massive exporting powerhouse in terms of wool, silk, that kind of thing. The industry is really bolstered by the arrival of Protestant refugees from the Low Countries fleeing the revolt in the Netherlands. They bring their far superior skills and quickly outdo the English merchants. But in typical English fashion, they get on board with it and very quickly intermarry and
assimilate the whole culture.
Yeah, want to get in on the action.
Fantastic. Now, I did obviously my little bit of reading before meeting you today, and I understand Norwich was it was a bit of a tip in certain places.
Yeah.
Before she arrived.
It's hilarious. So reading through all the city accounts of all the stuff that they had to very quickly clean up, all the dung heaps that had to be taken away, all the rules that had to be applied about you need to stop emptying your latrines into the street, butchers need to be cleaner, no animals just wandering around. Very, very panicked for that kind of 6 weeks before she arrives to just get everything done. Although not much changes. It's quite funny, the idea that the front of the houses need to be clean, but if the back of it's not, that's fine, because no one's going to see that.
It's all for show, isn't it? So they get about 8 weeks or something to prepare for this. They pour money into it, don't they?
In
terms of all the decorating, as you say, the cleaning, the decorating. And
so the council decides to borrow somewhere between £400 and £500. We don't know if they actually do and what the amount is, but that's going to be equivalent to almost £1 million today. So they're borrowing a lot of money.
For how many days did she say?
A week.
Wow, it's just incredible, isn't
Yeah.
it? I bet they were in debt for quite a long time
Yeah.
after that.
Well, that's the thing, it'd be interesting, we'll never know, but it would be interesting where they got the money from.
Yeah.
You know, if it was local people, local merchants who were able to fund it, or if they had to go further afield.
Yeah, interesting. So she approaches the city from the southwest. She's been through Suffolk. She arrives in Norfolk. So where is she greeted?
So she arrives 1 o'clock in the afternoon, just outside St. Stephen's Gate, so just over there. She's met by the Mayor of Norwich, or the alderman, and lots of, they're called bachelors, young sort of men of the city who are worthy, shall we say. She gets met by a lovely and lengthy Latin oration, is given a gold cup. The garter is very clear that it's worth about £100, so that's about £25,000 today.
That's a nice little welcoming gift, isn't it? So for those people who are listening and maybe not so familiar with Norwich, St Stephen's Gate, in fact many of the walls and gates of Norwich have now long gone. I think there was a concerted effort, I was reading, to take them down in the sort of late 18th, early 19th century. So we're really not left with any of the gates. And in fact, St Stephen's Gate would have stood where a large roundabout stands today. So Aidan and I figured, dear listeners, that we weren't going to stand in the middle of a roundabout doing the first part of this podcast here today. So in fact, we've come slightly further into the city. So we're inside the city walls now, or what would have been the city walls. And we are standing, and for those of you who are watching on YouTube, you will be able to see that we're standing in front of a church, and this is St Stephen's Church. Now, why have we come here?
So she is welcomed outside of St Stephen's Gate, and it being England, it starts raining, so she has to make haste, and she shelters in the gate during the rain. And while she's there, she's entertained by the city waits, by lovely music apparently.
Nice.
So yeah, the city waits are essentially an orchestra / band who are on the city's payroll, and just come out whenever the city needs to play relevant music. But so once the rain has stopped, she comes down the street to the first pageant of her progress, which is staged outside the church here.
Right outside. Now today it's a very busy street.
It is.
We've got the local buses are ploughing through, so we've taken refuge in the churchyard at the back of the church. Can you tell us about this particular pageant? And pageants were really big, weren't they, in this particular progress?
Yeah, so this is the first pageant, so it would have served as a kind of a welcome officially from the city. So we had the mayor's oration, a lengthy Latin piece is not really the most welcoming of speeches. It's actually quite interesting just on that. One of the pageant writers, Bernagata, who's hired by the city, includes English translations, which is unusual. And clearly he just knew that his readers would be, they would just switch off when they saw such a large amount of Latin.
Yeah.
But very good translation. Just it's not a hack translation, which I think is very interesting. But yeah, so this would have been the kind of the city's welcome, and we really see here the benefits of the refugees from the Low Countries here. So it's all about showing off the wool and textile industry that Norwich has now. So big stage set up, and on it there are 17 children. What's particularly special about this is that 16 of them are girls, which is, I think it's unique. It might not be because we don't have all the records, but as far as I can tell, it's the only pageant during Elizabeth's reign that so prominently features girl actors. And so they're on the stage, 8 of them are knitting and 8 of them are spinning, kind of showing off the textile industry. And then there's a boy at the front who kind of pronounces the pageant's meaning for Elizabeth to make sure that it can't be missed. But as you can guess from having all the spinning and the knitting on, it's all about the economic prosperity. Because at the end of the day, Elizabeth had to allow the refugees to settle there. So there is a kind of, thank you for letting this happen, but also a gentle reminder that a lot of the prosperity that Elizabeth has does come from the import taxes and duties that come from all this kind of stuff.
I love these kind of subversive themes that seem to get snuck under the wire. Do we know how Elizabeth reacted to that particular pageant?
Garter records that at the end she said, "This device is fine."
The royal seal of approval. Don't get too excited, Mom. But But yeah, that sounds great. So now, one of the things I just wanted to point out, in case we forget to talk about this, that there was a mile, wasn't there, between Elizabeth arriving at St Stephen's Gate and getting to her final destination,
Yeah.
but it took an enormous amount of time. So when you said that these orations were long, they were long, weren't they?
Well, so she arrives at her lodgings by evening, and if she's arriving at 1 p.m, that's at least, if we're saying evening is even 4 o'clock, that's still 4 hours.
To go like 1 mile.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got to admire her stamina,
Yes.
haven't you, really?
You can see why she started out the day only about 5 miles from here. Didn't want a lot. She knew it was going to be a hard slog.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, she was well used to this,
Yeah.
so she knew what to expect and girded her loins appropriately.
Well, what's really interesting, we don't know where, but she stopped somewhere during those 5 miles to get changed and get dressed and get ready.
Wow.
So yeah, she was clearly on it.
Yeah, clearly on it. So where do we go from here? Where's the next stop?
Just outside the market.
Okay. Oh, the marketplace. I'm looking forward to seeing the marketplace. Apparently it's really lovely. So why don't we go?
Yes.
Okay, let's go. Marketplace here. This was the second major pageant?
Yeah. Elizabeth would have come down the street behind us probably. It would have been met by an arch that had been specially built for the occasion. As we mentioned, Norwich was not the tidiest of places before her arrival, so it seems like they had built something to distract a little bit from it.
Okay.
So yeah, it was 2 pageants here, one just outside. And I have to admit, it's my favourite of the pageants, mainly because it has biblical figures in it, and my work really does revolve around biblical figures. So in it, there are 5 people playing women. It's not clear whether they are actually women or men playing the role, but 3 biblical figures, so Deborah the judge, the widow Judith, and Queen Esther. And then there's a representation of the city of Norwich. And then Marcia, the daughter-in-law of the mythical King Gurgant, who was supposed to have built Norwich Castle.
Okay, which, by the way, viewers, you can see directly behind us over our shoulder here. Okay, so some names that I've never heard of.
You're not the first person to say that. I realise that my interest in biblical figures is not a shared interest with a lot of people. But we have to remember that people in early modern England, their biblical literacy, for lack of a better phrase, was incredible. Even just me saying the name Deborah, they would have totally understood what I was talking about, what the meaning of it. So if we think about what I said earlier about all of the religious strife, shall we say, that had caused Elizabeth to visit, not at all surprising that 3 different famous biblical women were used to not only talk about the city's, they recognised that they were in the wrong, but also to realise that they just wanted God to be worshipped truly, and that's all they wanted.
Okay. So it's a little bit dangerous here. We've worked out in the middle of this marketplace because we've nearly been run over by cars and bikes and all sorts. So forgive us, viewers, if you see us moving around a little bit. Won't be affecting those people listening to the podcast, though. So the message was here, just to summarise, the message for Elizabeth was?
We're sorry for being naughty. We'll do better. And yes, we'll stop being so Catholic and so Puritan.
Okay. By the way, did they succeed in this?
Not really. The bishop is still getting in trouble years later for not fixing the problem. Ends up getting into a messy legal dispute with his chancellor because his chancellor is much more Puritan. So yeah.
So it's
a lot
of flim-flam and not much action going on. Okay, right, I got it. Okay, so anything else we need to know about this pageant before we move on to our next stop on the progress?
No, I think
we're ready to move on. Okay, so, well, we're moving a bit faster than Elizabeth did.
Yes, most definitely.
Where do we need to go next, Aidan?
So the next pageant is inside the market. It does seem to be a little bit of a walk, so I'm assuming it's kind of over there.
Okay, so So in the direction, there's a beautiful looking church. I don't think it's consecrated anymore, but we're going to head in that direction and see if we can find this spot. So we're going to go on an adventure. Let's go and see if we can find it. Okay, let's go. So for those of you who are watching, we are now outside this glorious building, which is an early 15th century guildhall. So not the deconsecrated church that I thought it was. But we've come here because, Aidan, you and I were postulating that this just could be the kind of area that this next pageant happens.
So the third pageant takes place on a scaffold set up outside of the worthy alderman's house, Mr. Peck. And there's a good chance it was about there. So,
okay, right, so in this area. So what do we need to know about this pageant?
So this is the first pageant not devised by Garter. So this progress is unique in that it has two different accounts because two different pageant devisers were involved. So the first was Norwich local boy Thomas Churchyard, whose other claim to fame is that he was responsible for the 1574 progress in Bristol, which is the first published progress in early modern England. So if you discount Elizabeth's coronation procession, it is the first surviving civic entertainment publication. So he gets hired again by his hometown to devise some pageants, but then later on the city starts to panic for some reason that they won't be good enough. So they hire a second person, Bernard Garter from London. So Garter devised the first two pageants we've just talked about, but Churchyard was responsible for this one, the third one. It's quite funny because with their separate accounts, he kind of makes out that this is the first one. It kind of, after the mayor's welcome, he kind of implies that they just walked kind of straight here and nothing happened in between.
Yeah.
As you would do when it's not your own pageant.
It's all right, we're laughing because I've almost just been run over by a car trying to park. We're taking our lives in our hands here, guys, to bring you this on-location podcast. Anyway, so sorry to interrupt, Aidan. Do carry on.
I do admit that the second pageant is my favourite, but this third one comes a close second because it features a boy who is dressed up essentially as a ridiculous Turkish caricature. He's in a ridiculous taffeta gown with a big turban on. It's a total kind of stereotype almost.
Yeah.
It doesn't resemble anything even close to what the Ottomans were wearing. But given that the Elizabethans were trying to make a trade deal with the Ottomans and in fact signed one the year later in 1579, it's perhaps not that surprising that they decided to go down that route.
Okay, wow. So can you feel the difference between the two men who created these different pageants? Did they look and feel very different, do you think?
I wouldn't have said yes when I first started looking at them. They feel very similar, but given how familiar I am with them now, I can tell. Garter is much more, I almost want to say toes the party line in a way. Here's a much more, there is a reason he has the welcome pageant, the one where we're sorry for being naughty. I don't think Churchyard would have done it or had done it as well. Although we can see sort of almost an improvement in Churchyard's abilities compared to the Bristol pageant from 1574. He's definitely got better at it this time around. But again, not surprised that the city decided that they wanted someone else to kind of help out a little bit.
Okay.
I think he's good for, Churchyard is good for entertaining kind of tableaus that are about performance rather than anything deep and meaningful.
Right. Okay, righty-ho. And do we have any record of what Elizabeth was feeling or saying at this point?
So this one is quite funny. We were a bit delayed because she was listening to the music of the Waits, which she was loving. Churchyard says the music was sweet and good, so she didn't notice the pageant at first. And then Garter gets really, really annoyed because there's an overzealous bell ringer somewhere, just totally going off, ringing the bells in excitement, which makes it very difficult to hear anything. And of course, Churchyard is very upset by this. But you can't help it, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The Queen is here. So yeah, someone somewhere is ringing bells very loudly and very incessantly. Finally, when they get everything under control, they get to hear the boy's speech. And he, at the end of it, he's wearing a laurel crown on top of his turban because, as you do. And he throws it up in the air at the end, and Elizabeth is very pleased with everything.
Okay, great, good. We have a happy queen, excellent. And I'm about to get run over yet again. So I think this is probably a good cue to move on to our next pageant. Where are we going next, Aidan?
We're heading towards the cathedral.
Oh, lovely, excellent. Really right in the heart of the
Yes.
city and close to where Elizabeth was going to be staying.
Exactly.
So let's make our way there. Okay,
Yeah.
let's go.